and we're about to conclude. So unless you, because how many years now in a row have I come to Soquel Campmeeting? Or at least maybe even 5, I think. And this is unusual at Soquel. That doesn't usually happen. And I say to Jerry every year, you know, Jerry, you don't have to feel obligated for me to keep coming back. Oh, he said, I know, but it's public pressure. And I said, well, thank you. But if that public pressure isn't there, of course, it won't happen. But I do feel it's imperative that we have Hebrews 2 because big chapters, and I don't want to rush through them. And the issue that was raised this morning before we quit, that's a huge issue. It has actually created a shaking in Adventism. I hope you know that, a serious shaking. Many pastors, many members have left the church because of a failure to comprehend Daniel 8:14 and related issues. And the fundamental stand on it that we have historically taken has been seriously challenged. I mean seriously challenged. It's not coincidental that my former professor perhaps has been the biggest challenge to this position, and it's caused me to go back and re-examine these things much more seriously than I may have been tempted to do. My confidence is high, I want you to know that. Amen. But I do think and I confess that we have been guilty in the past perhaps of approaching the investigative judgment from a somewhat legalistic perspective rather than showing the magnificence of the gospel. As I was saying to somebody at lunchtime, well, what are you going to prove about me by examining me? It's pretty well known. I'm not on trial. The great controversy is not the trial of Bill Liversidge. I am privileged to be one of the chess pieces on the great chessboard, and an examination of my life will reveal something marvelous about the one who's known me since the beginning. Do you know what it's going to reveal? The incredible effort that God has put in to bring about my redemption and to lead me into a relationship with himself. That's what it's going to show. I don't know if we could possibly do it next year, but the study of the 7 seals, one of the most profound studies in the book of Revelation. I never knew that the answer to what really happens in the investigative judgment is contained in the prophecy of the 7 seals. And the opening of that book, sealed with 7 seals. But Ellen White gave me a little trigger to that. You ever discovered the name that she uses for that book? The book sealed with the 7 seals, she gives it a name. And when I read that name, I said to myself, okay, I do believe we're on a fairly good track here. You know what she calls that book? Sealed with the 7 seals. You think she calls it the book containing the dismal record of all your failures? No. She calls it the book of God's providences. Isn't that profound? The book of God's... And I said, yes! That's exactly what we've been finding, because I wondered for years, as the seals are broken and the book finally opens up, why it doesn't point to a record of all my mistakes and perhaps my better times. But to know what is seen as the book opens up, horsemen, 4 horsemen go riding forth. And I thought, what a strange development. The book is opened, the seals are broken, and instead of focusing on a list of my dismal performances, horsemen are seen riding forth. It was the first clue we had that the focus of this book was not the good deeds and the bad deeds of the names that are in it, but rather a record of the providences of God. And, oh yes, well there'll be plenty of that, but it's going to show the providence. Yes, it doesn't only contain the names of the saved, we know that. But there'll never be a question throughout eternity, did you know that? There will never be a question as to God's integrity when that book has been examined. Do you know why? Because even the record of the lost, do you know what it's going to reveal? It's going to see white horsemen, red horsemen, black horsemen, pale horsemen, and just guess who's sending them out? God himself. It's an incredible picture. Even the lost are going to bear testimony to the incredible effort that God has put in to bring about their salvation. So my gratitude for God went through the roof. In fact, the woman in Florida, when she went through that seminar on the 7 seals, she just wept. She fell down on her knees and wept. And I said, what's the problem? She said, I just never knew that God would be prepared to go to such lengths to save little old me. I said, hallelujah. Pat?
Something that's right on your point, and something that John brought up to me this morning. When Jesus sits down on the right hand of the Father, do you know what's in the Father's right hand? The hand of the Son, a revelation of himself and his people.
Certainly, yes. Because this is the theme of the whole book of Revelation, remember. It's announced from verse 1. But thank you for reminding us of that, John. That's exactly what this book is called. The Revelation. The revelation of whom? The revealing of Jesus. And the strangest statement of all in verse 1 of Revelation 1, the revelation of Jesus Christ which God gave him. Who's the him? So the whole book of Revelation is the story of how God gives Jesus a revelation of himself. He presents it to him, and it's all in that little book that is sealed with 7 seals. Great study. It's a whole weekend study, by the way. We offer it to churches, believe it or not.
What book do you have that?
Shh, shh. Janice is asking.
And this is why, sorry, what book is that in?
Is what in?
The 7 seals that you're talking about.
I didn't say that. I wasn't talking about
But you said
the understanding of the 7 seals and her writings. I was talking about the name of the book.
Right.
And
But you were she wants to know where the reference for the Ellen White statement is.
that's what I'm presuming, yes, and I don't have it on me because I'm not dealing with that. I would have a different notebook with me otherwise. I'd have to look it up. But you can look it up. Look up the book sealed with 7 seals and you'll have it. So anybody yet needing further information on seminars? We still have a few folders left yet, or cards. Anyone needing that information? Kim, would you scout around and give those out for us? And if you give out those cards, just roam around the room quickly. There's a few hands up yet. If you need a business card with my personal information on it, it's there. If you'd like a brochure outlining the types of seminars available, don't take one if you've already got that information. Kim? Oh. Now, Joanne, you don't really need that brochure, do you? You who are seminared out, huh? Yeah, thank you. Let's give it to someone else that hasn't yet been to a...
who do we contact?
Listen, shh, 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 shh.
Who do we contact regarding having you invited back here next year?
The one whom God has chosen to lead us. Who every year turns over a new leaf That's why his name is Page. In other words, El Presidente. No, do not talk to Janet. I mean, she's a great praying woman, but I suggest strongly that you talk to El Presidente. No. Those kind of decisions are made through El Presidente and his section. Believe me, I have vast experience in these matters. And how does it work so far each year? So, trust me. Just be very discreet this year because, somebody did go to Jerry last year and say, oh, Bill Liversidge has asked us all to convince you that he should come back. I said, great. But wouldn't that be marvelous if we could do the 7 seals? Wow. Mark, the gift of cynicism is not recorded in Scripture. Yeah, we have to finish Hebrews. All right, listen carefully now. Shh. By the way, I wish I'll wait for the competition to quit. Thank you. I wish we had this whole group on a regular basis. Imagine if we were just one church and you guys were coming together every week. I mean, midweek, Sabbaths, and we were digging in like this. Can you imagine what would happen? And you've tackled, I'm serious, you guys have tackled here this morning some substantial issues. Substantial issues, and we've simply gone into the Word and started hearing it. And some very original things coming out this morning. My mind is stirred. I'm going to be following up on these things. And of course, next time I teach this, I'll have even deeper questions to ask because the understanding. But I have kept you for 3/4 of the week. I've had you at the elementary level, remember? Now we're moving you into the meat of the Word. Well, I get very excited when I see people's minds triggered. I mean, what Marla came out with, the Spirit gave you that this morning. What an incredible thing. Becky's point before that opened up a door, and people all over the room have been coming up with things that have just opened our mind. Amen. I've never taught Hebrews before. I mean, not in a series like this. I was dying in preparing for this because I said to myself, I'm not even sure I'm grasping all this. And yet I should have known that trusting the method and the fact that the Spirit is here, He will keep growing us in understanding. Amen. Now, you all know, don't you, that when we did the 7 trumpets here, I came under serious attack. I think I may have told you that. And we had a gentleman sitting in the room at the time who was one of our former world leaders, and wrote a letter to the president of this conference and made the profound statement in that letter that Elder Liversidge is actually permitting lay people to interpret the Bible for themselves. So I said to Jerry, does that disqualify me from coming back? And I laughed and wrote me a letter too outlining the same thought. I felt very judged. But as I prayed about it, God said to me, that's what God said to me. He said, well, if that's your biggest defect, you should be smiling. Because I'm committed to the priesthood of all believers. And it's a totally different system where the priests have the spiritual authority and the laity are considered to be Janice, it's your naivete that's always been your best feature. And, praise the Lord for it. I wish I had that gift of trusting to the degree that you have it. I'm trying to have it. All right, so a big question was raised, wasn't it, this morning? And I'm raising it deliberately because I believe that pastors have a responsibility to the people they are teaching and preaching to. And that if anyone is swept away, shaken, changes horses in midstream, I don't want it coming back on me. That you were unprepared and ill-equipped, because you know what great controversy says at the end, where the multitudes discover that they have been deceived. And by the way, those multitudes can come from our ranks, remember. Who do they turn upon? The false pastors and teachers. You know what they say to them? Some of the most terrible words that Ellen White was ever called to write. And these are in the final chapters of Great Controversy, so these are future prophecy. This is not a compilation of history. Those final chapters are all future prophecy. And she says that they turn upon their false pastors and ministers and say to them, we are lost, and you are the cause of our ruin. And the swords that they were about to use incredibly to destroy the people of God, they now turn against the false leaders. And there is strife and bloodshed from one end of the earth to the other. Because those of you that have been with me when we've studied some very exciting things in Revelation 16, 17 and 18, you know exactly what symbolic experience Ellen White is enlarging on when she makes that statement, don't you? Go ahead and make my day now. Joanne?
The drying up of the Euphrates.
It's an excellent guess. She's actually explaining the incredible symbolic statement, the drying up of the river Euphrates. Yes, she is. And that the only reason God wouldn't let her come out and say it's the meaning of the drying up of the river Euphrates, I'm sure I shared that before, is because Uriah Smith had just published his volume on Daniel and the Revelation, in which he saw Turkey and a number of other powers associated in this movement, and Ellen White saw it as those individuals who had been deceived, turning against their former spiritual leaders. And so God convinced her not to identify it as the sixth plague, but to simply describe it. And I wondered for years why Ellen White in Great Controversy said, this is the first plague, this is the second plague, this is the third plague, this is the fourth plague, but she nowhere ever says this is the fifth plague, or this is the... I'm saying that's inconsistent. She even starts a new chapter. Then I found out about Uriah Smith, and you know what God's wisdom to Ellen White was? It's more important to retain the unity of the church than for you to prove yourself right on this point. And I thought, you know, my admiration for Ellen White went sky high. I said, what a remarkable woman. How tempting it would have been to say, well, I've got the authority of God with me, what have you got, you know? But she actually wrote to the brethren and expressed her total confidence in Uriah Smith, urged them to keep him on as editor of Review and Herald, and told them that he was a man of God who was to be trusted. She believed in him, and yet at the same time she knew that he had some interpretations of prophecy that were really not going to hold up, but it didn't lessen God's ability to use him, did it? But what a lesson we can learn from that, can't we? I believe, however, it's much more important to understand those issues today than it was 150 years ago. But nevertheless, we still have individuals who are prepared to sacrifice the love and unity of churches in their determination to prove themselves right. That's why I'm excited by the process where we come together in the Spirit and we come to a consensus. We may not have agreed on every single point, but we're still loving each other, aren't we? We're having fun in the process, and I want to tell you, truth is emerging. Truth is emerging. Now, I left you with a very big question this morning. Very big question. One, of course, which could take an entire week to process. I'm well aware of that. This question is big enough that it has shaken some of the leading lights in the Adventist church. It has shaken 65% of all the pastors in Australia and New Zealand have left the Adventist church. It has shaken our top theologian who instructed us all in righteousness. It's caused him to have no confidence in the prophetic and historic foundations of Adventism. It has forced me to go back into these prophecies and re-examine them. And I believe, even though our understanding is increasing continually, that we have not been foolishly led in the past, you know.
Amen.
Forgive me, Lord. Brooklyn is looking good. I know why God's just done what he's done. In a moment, in an act of great grace, God has actually made it possible next weekend, totally unexpectedly, for me to be back in New York. He must mean me to be back in Brooklyn again. To restore my soul. The amens that I'll be restored in. Very trying, yes. Well, I wasn't planning to be in New York next week. It's just happened today, so I was wondering why it had happened that way, but now I sense that it all comes together.
Okay, you'll be ready for us.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So the question, did I have it up here? Have I erased it or what? I didn't put it up there, okay. You mean you're only just coming to grips with the question now? So how did I word it previously? What developments? Okay. Let's put biblical first, huh? What biblical developments? Who was feeding that to me then?
Biblical elements would you expect from 1844 on?
Would you expect?
When Jesus changes his master.
Would you expect to, let's say, to take place? Okay, when Jesus shifts the emphasis of his ministry. This is a very wordy question, isn't it? Joanne, you know I have ways of evening things out here.
Better not.
When Jesus shifts the emphasis in his ministry, yes, in his ministry, I'm going to go on and begins. This is the beginning of a book. I can feel it coming on here, and begins his final. What word should I? Atonement. Yes, nothing wrong with that. Atonement. And of course I'm going to put here, in other words, since 1844, and I'm not going to re-establish 1844. I just did it again last week, as I told you all, with an individual down south, and I'm totally at peace with 1844. I've also had the most unusual, I don't know if I have time to tell you that story, the the most unusual confirmation of 1844 from the most unlikely source. And that is a teacher of theology at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, a professor of theology and ancient languages. I had the unique opportunity while I was in Jerusalem to study this subject with a professor from Hebrew University. God placed him literally almost in my lap, so to speak. I don't know if you could imagine getting on a bus in Tel Aviv and there's only one seat left and it's heading to Jerusalem, and I wanted to get there before Sabbath. And so I went up the aisle and took the one seat, and it wasn't a very big seat, but there was theoretically room for two people. And the bus was about to take off for Jerusalem, 40 miles away, when a great big Orthodox Jew in full regalia, ringlets and all, and little cap, got on the bus and looked around. And I said to myself, well, I'm about to find out if I'm unclean or not. Because there's only one seat left in this bus. Then I looked at the size of him. And I looked at the size of that little seat next to me, and I thought, this could become very interesting. Anyway, at first I thought he wasn't even going to take the seat because he was hesitating, and I was obviously the one person who stood out from everybody else on this bus. Being a non-Israeli, that was fairly apparent. Anyway, he must have decided he needed to get to Jerusalem too, so he shuffled down. It's the only word to describe it. He shuffled, even though he wasn't that aged, but he was very heavy. He shuffled down the centre aisle of the bus and plopped himself down and immediately began to spread out. And even though I am truly on a weight loss program myself at the moment, he began to squeeze me up against the wall of the bus. I was having difficulty breathing, so I started kind of elbowing him a little bit, but it was like elbowing a well-filled balloon. I just bounced off him, and he didn't even seem to notice my little elbows. So I thought, well, at least I'm not in danger of moving or falling around. I'm stuck here. I'm jammed in. Yes, indeed, it's like having that's a good illustration of an airbag. Anyway, we were going along, and he made no effort to communicate with me, and I don't know why. I am kind of naturally quite garrulous, you know. I mean, I know you would never have guessed that, but I am also of great curiosity, and I love talking to people in public places, especially to see their responses, you know. And so I said good afternoon to him, and he kind of grunted. I said, you know, my name is Bill. And then, of course, I asked one of those insipid questions that you feel such a dingbat when you ask it, you know. I said to him, are you going to Jerusalem too? We're both on a bus labelled Jerusalem. And I said to myself, what a dingbat. I'm trying to get conversation with this stone wall, and it was the most inane thing I could have said, and he looked at me and he said, obviously. I said, at least I got a response. I said, well, I'm hurrying to get there. And he said, me too. I guessed that, because he's Orthodox. And then he looked at me with greater interest and he said, well, why are you hurrying? He took the bait. And I began to reel him in. And I said, and God gave me this, I have to give God all the glory, but I said to him, and this was not my thinking, I knew it was God's thinking, I said, well, it's Shabbat, using the Hebrew word, which I knew would be attractive to him. He said, you mean Sunday? Because I'm reeling him in even more, you know. And he asked me if I had recently had jet lag, you know. I said, no, I mean Shabbat. He said, Shabbat? And he looked at me and he said, but you're not Jewish. And you know, God gave me the most incredible thought. I said to him, you want to bet? I may in fact be more Jewish than you. Oh, I challenged him. And I said, I'm very proud of my Jewish roots. He was really puzzled. And I could see that he wasn't sure whether to go on because it could get dangerous. He hesitated. He said, are you a Christian? I said, yes, I am a Christian. He said, well, I don't know of a Christian who worships on Shabbat. I said, well, your fund of knowledge is about to expand. I could see this is a very learned man, by the way, expert in biblical languages. All those ancient languages, he speaks them all. Anyway, I said, I actually belong to a Protestant church that is 100 yards away from the wall of the old city of Jerusalem, who will be meeting this evening to welcome in Shabbat. And I said it also happens to be in the Jewish section. He said, I've never heard of it. I said, what's it called? Seventh day. Never heard of it. He said, and you really worship on Shabbat? I said, I told you I have Jewish roots. And I'm very proud of it. I said, surely you don't believe, an educated man like you don't believe that Sabbath, Shabbat, was made for the Jews. Your own scriptures indicate that it was made for man. Silence. And this was the most unexpected thing. He turned to me and he said, would you be willing to visit my home? Wow. Last kind of thing I ever expected to happen. I said, when? And he grinned at me and he said, well, tomorrow afternoon. I said, but that's Shabbat. He said, yes, I'd like you to come on Shabbat afternoon. But he explained to me to be very careful walking through this section because if you do things that are not acceptable, you might have some uncomfortable experiences. And I was aware of that. So I said to him, well, I will only come, and God kept giving me these ideas, I will only come to your house on one condition. He said, you're a tough man. I'm thinking to myself, how little he knows. He said, you have a condition to come to my house? I said, yes. I have a condition. All right, he said. What's the condition? I said, the condition is that you will study Scripture with me, and I will choose the passage. He said, well, naturally, it will be an Old Testament passage. I said, naturally. And I said, I will be free to choose the passage. That's my condition. He's almost landed. And he's so confident, he said, I should warn you, I'm a professor of biblical languages, Greek, Aramaic, Hebrew. I'll be reading all the scriptures you're reading in the original language. I said, that will strengthen, I hope, our study. I look forward to that. And with great confidence he said, well, it's your risk. I said, yes, I'm willing to take the risk. So he said, well, there's no passage that I would be uncomfortable with. I said, really? So he said, where would you like to study? I said, I would like to study one of the prophets that are so popular in your theology. And I'm also fond of them because of my own Jewish roots. Kept emphasizing this. He said, well, great. He said, I'm an expert on the prophets. I was tempted to tell him that I was from a non-profit group, but I decided not to. I decided this was not an occasion for punning, so I let that slide. I was rather proud of my self-control. Amen. So he said, which prophet? I said, now you did say you were comfortable with all, like the law and the prophets. He was amazed that I would even know the breakdown of his own scriptures. Oh, yes. He said, be my guest. Choose which one. I said, good. I am interested in studying a prophecy with you from the prophet Daniel, which the Jews do not study. Closed book to them. And he looked at me. He said, maybe you are Jewish. And then he burst out laughing. This guy had a great sense of humor. I discovered I had this fantastic human beings on my hand, you know. And I'm starting to enjoy him, because when he laughed, it was like... You know how lava spills out over there. And he had this wonderful sense of humor. I said, well, I did tell you that I had Jewish roots. Abraham is my father. What can I say, you know? That's biblical, isn't it? I'm of the seed of Abraham. Because he doesn't know where that's coming from yet. So he said, Daniel. Well, he said, you have chosen well. I said, yes, I believe I have. And he said, is there a particular prophecy in Daniel that you wish to study? I said, absolutely. I said, this is such a unique opportunity for me to sit at the feet of a man that can read it even in the original languages. I would not like to miss this opportunity. I wish to study the prophecy of Daniel 8 and 9. Of the 2,300 evenings and mornings. I thought I saw a little twitch on his face. I said to myself, I have him. He wasn't quite as enthusiastic. I said, I hope it's okay. Oh, yes, he said, yes, absolutely. I said, wonderful. I said, now, of course, I realized that this is written in Aramaic in the original, which I understand you speak, so I'll be calling on you from time to time to reinforce parts of this prophecy. So he agreed. 3 o'clock, Sabbath afternoon, I went to the street named Rehov, Yoel, the street called Joel. Quiet, deadly quiet, no buses going by. The buses literally get stoned if they try and pass through this area on Shabbat. Very quiet, and I was very impressed by the pious Orthodox walking around in their black hats and their ringlets and reading little books as they smoked their cigarettes in the other hand. I was quite fascinated and intrigued by this scene. Deathly quiet. And I found my way around and I knocked on the door. I was almost reluctant to knock. It disrupted the quiet atmosphere. And he opened the door and welcomed me in, and the house looked very dark. And we sat down in the living room. He introduced me to his wife, very gracious lady, and gave me a drink. And he said, well, he had a big pile of books there. He said, oh, we're ready to begin. I said, well, you know, it really wouldn't hurt if we had some light in here. It would be easier for me to read if there were light. Very dark, I could hardly see the pages. And he looked at me reprovingly and said, Shabbat. I said, well, you know, even though I am of the seed of Abraham, I'm obviously from a different branch from you. And if it's okay with you, but in our branch, we can turn on the light on Shabbat. So if you like, I will turn on the light, because he wasn't going to do it. He said, so I went over and turned on the light. And we sat down. Very cold time of the year. I mean, I was freezing. And I'm starting to shiver. And I said to him, because I was reluctant to ask for anything else, you know, I said, is there any heat? And he was about to say Shabbat, and I noticed the light was on in the kitchen. Oh, I said, you know, that looks much warmer in there. Would it be okay with you if we moved into the kitchen and we could sit around the kitchen table? Oh, he said, certainly. So we went into the kitchen, and there were only 2 chairs at the table, a small kitchen, but very warm and cozy. I didn't know why it was so warm and cozy at that moment. And his wife was standing there with us, and he made no effort to get another chair for her. Because then I realized that Shabbat. So I said to him, would it be okay if I went and fetched another chair from the living room? So I went and got a chair. I did all the work on Shabbat. And we sat down around the table, and I'd kind of gone from the North Pole to the equator. I'm starting to sweat. And I looked around, and I could hardly believe my eyes. The stove was on. And there were like 2 or 3 saucepans on it, and they were all bubbling, and steam was coming out of them. And I'm wicked. I looked at him, and I could not hold this back, and I said, Shabbat. That was surely one of my great moments, I thought. And his eyes lit up, and he had this great big grin. He said, well, actually, we turned it on the lowest heat just before sunset. And it's been simmering away all day, and this evening after sunset we'll turn it off. I said, touche. Anyway, I've got to get off the story. And we got into Daniel 8 and 9. I want to tell you one of life's great moments. Educated, wise, spiritual man. And I just let him. This man was so smart, he even knew the dating of the events associated. I've never yet, in 35 years of ministry, have you met anyone, Pat, in giving Bible studies and things, that's ever known the date of the beginning of that prophecy, for example? I haven't met one person in all the years I've been giving Bible studies. And as we looked at the beginning, and he had no problem associating the 70 weeks with the 2300-day prophecy. He saw the connection there. He was not super familiar with the prophecy. I was grateful for that. But he worked it through, and I had him work it through inductively. He pulled the whole thing together, and he said, you know, the commandment to restore Jerusalem. He said, I'm sure you know. He gave me the historical lecture that there were 3 returns from Babylon, and he went through the details, and these are the dates. And I'm going... And so we came to an agreement as to which date fit the precise wording of the prophecy, because it was the decree to return and rebuild. And so we finally came to that incredible date, 457. Once that was in place, I knew I had him. And he still did not see what was coming. And we worked through the 70 weeks, and we're coming to the final week, and I knew this was the big moment. So we looked very carefully at the final week. And he already had the dates in place for the beginning of the final week, 27 AD, 31 AD, 34 AD. Not the reckoning that was of the Jewish reckoning, but I urged him to have the reckoning that I was familiar with, because it's really the same year, they just call it differently. I said, okay, now what happens during the final week? And all of a sudden he saw it. He said, you know, I'm not sure I can go any further. I said, you promised. This was my condition, that you would study this prophecy with me, and I meant completely. And it's one of those incredible moments. He actually looked at me and he said, wistfully, he said, you know, if I proceed, especially with the wording of what is to come, he said, I will have to acknowledge that the promised Messiah came during that final week, and that he was cut off. I said, yes, you would. I mean, I could hardly believe this was happening. I said, you would have to acknowledge that. He said, could you give me a... I don't believe that you can find a way around the fact that this prophecy is a prediction regarding the coming of the Messiah. And I ask you, whose Messiah, to which people was this prophecy entrusted? A prophet of Judah in captivity in Babylon. So we prayed together, and he wanted to give me a tour of the old city, the most incredible tour I've ever had in my life. He knew every stone in that city and the history of it. I mean, a remarkable opportunity. Personal tour, just the two of us. We walked the whole city all the way around and in and out, whole day. And we came around to, those of you who have been there, you know, the royal gate is sealed. It's sealed up with blocks of stone. And it overlooks the Mount of Olives, where the Jewish cemeteries are, the big cemeteries. Well, that's if you can afford to be buried in one of those cemeteries. And all the graves are slanting like this, so that when the Messiah comes, he will burst through that gate, and all those that are sleeping there, they'll just stand straight up on their feet. It'll be very little effort. And they will more or less fall into the arms of the promised Messiah as he bursts through the only gate in the city that is not open today, the royal gate, overlooking the Mount of Olives. And we came to the royal gate, and he said, do you know the history of this gate? I said, yes, but I'd love to hear it again from you, because he had so much more knowledge than any guide I'd ever had. Anyway, he said, you know, Messiah is to come through this gate. I said, yes, I know. And I said, while we're standing here, it's time for me to ask you, has Messiah already come through this gate? God gave me that, you know. Has Messiah already come through this gate? And it's been blocked up after the fact. And he looked at me, and he began to weep. He said, yes. I said, you realize the implication of what you've said? He said, I realize the implication of it. He said, it's very difficult for me. I'm a professor at Hebrew University. I said, I understand. But he said, my tenure runs out in 2 years' time. I said, you know, the scripture says, as your conscience is, so be it unto you. you have acknowledged today that Jesus Christ is the Messiah, that's enough for me. Because you will have no peace now until you act upon this. And I preached a little sermon to him, put my arm around him, and we stood there. It's one of those dramatic moments. We stood there with the royal gate behind us, looking over across the Mount of Olives. And I pointed out to him, Jesus stood there and wept over this city. And he's standing there again today weeping over you because he's so happy that you have recognized him as the Messiah. Amen. He said, in 2 years' time I've applied for and I'm moving to Canada. He said, would it be okay if I act upon it then? I said, hey, it's all in your timing and God's hands. So he started to write to me. We've been in regular correspondence, and 2 years later he moved to Toronto, where he now lives. And a year after he moved to Toronto, he wrote me a letter. He said, well, I've just been baptized as a Christian. And he said, can you come and see me? Because he said, I now realize for the first time why it might be important to be a Shabbat-keeping Christian. And he's a Seventh-day Adventist today, by the way. And in the great, incredible providence of God, he was leaving Toronto on a plane, flying to New York, and sitting next to him, a Seventh-day Adventist, who opens up and shares his faith. And he looked at this guy and he said, you're not the first. I can't get away from you. But it was his commitment to the Sabbath that has enabled him to make the bridge into Adventism. Incredible experience. But you know what I said to myself? After I recovered from the shock of having a Hebrew professor actually admit that Jesus was the Messiah, I said to myself, this is so confirming of the fact that we have not been led foolishly, that William Miller was a man of God led by the Spirit. Do you believe it? Amen. That he wrestled with these things hours, days and nights. I can't believe William Miller unlocked this, It's an incredible thing. He could never have done it without the Spirit of God just guiding his mind. And as I visited his home just the other day, and they were telling the story of how he would often go out and spend the entire night out there in the grove of trees, especially when he reached a point where his understanding couldn't go any further. He would just spend the night in prayer until it came to him. I said, wow, made me more determined, that we should do the same. God will unlock all the secrets if we are willing to do the same. Marlon?
What did you study with us in Daniel 8? Was that just to kind of prime things?
Well, you can't get into Daniel 9 without the foundations of Daniel 8. I mean, the whole sequence of events leading up to. Actually, I think now that I flash back that we actually summarized Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 as well, like I did with the Baptist preacher in Vermont the other day. Some of you know I just had a seminar in a Baptist church in Vermont, and wow. Just got a message from that, he's a Jewish man, by the way, who's now the Baptist preacher there, who asked me, if you weren't present when I told the story, has asked me to help him make the transition to become an Adventist pastor. And he's just left a message on my phone this week. He wants another seminar as soon as possible on Revelation, so he can fill in the gaps. I'm saying, getting more. God's doing great things, isn't he? I hope you have not lost confidence in the foundations, have you?
No.
I really hope you haven't, because when you examine them in depth, you're going to find they're very solid foundations. I'm not saying that there's not more light to come. There is more light to come. And there's understandings that will yet increase. But the foundations, in my humble opinion, are very solid. And it was just so confirming to have a Jewish Hebrew professor see that prophecy unravel step by step. So, what biblical developments? I'm going to give you 10 minutes only to pull your thinking together, pull your little teams together, I know you've all been going without lunch just so you could complete this assignment, and I appreciate that dedication, but pull your group together, please. Don't sit gazing up into heaven. Don't look as though you have leprosy. The question's on the board. Address it.
We should limit ourselves.
Key chapter, of course. Key chapter. Big chapter. Because if you've plucked some things out of Daniel 8, why would you begin with Daniel 8? That's where the prophecy is. And that's part of the criticism we're getting about our interpretation of this prophecy, that we have failed to take into account the historical setting in which it was given. I mean, why did one angel turn to another angel and say, how long? How long what? Come on, open your Bibles to Daniel 8. There's a 1,000-page thesis being written on this, by the way, which is the root cause of many defections. Because the man who wrote it, my former professor, Dr. Desmond Ford, was challenged by his own professor when he did that second PhD of his at the University of Manchester. F.F. Bruce, one of the most famous scholars, theologians in the world today. And he said to Desmond Ford, how come that in Daniel 8 it's a little horn who is trampling on these things, and at the end of this prophecy you have some kind of bookkeeping going on in heaven? It's a remarkable transition to make. It's a very good question to raise. When a little horn on earth is trampling down the people of God and other things which you're about to feed back to me, hopefully, how come at the end of this prophecy which says, how long is this trampling down going to go on for? You're trying to tell us that the understanding of that stretches into a bookkeeping session in heaven, where the records are investigated. And F.F. Bruce said this is the most remarkable leap I have ever seen. And of course, my friend and colleague said, well, I can explain it to you, and set about endeavoring to explain it, and found out that he couldn't defend it. And that was the beginning of the end, so to speak, and he's written a 1,000-page thesis on this, explaining why he couldn't defend that position. I don't have a problem defending it myself, and I've discussed this in person with him. I don't have a problem defending it because I'm allowing myself to hear what it was that's being trampled. And if you keep in mind what is being trampled, you might just catch a glimpse of what is to be restored. And you all know that one translation of Daniel 8:14 reads, unto 2,300 evenings and mornings, and then shall the sanctuary be restored to its rightful place. There are many scholars believe that's the way it ought to read. I don't mind which way it goes, cleansed, restored to its rightful place. I rather like that, because the word restoration suggests to me that there's something that's been taken away. It's been trampled. It's been denied, and I want, beginning with Daniel 8, I want to know, is there any evidence here in the immediate context as to what it was that was being trampled? I'm taking hands now, David. What verse are you in?
Daniel 8:12.
Okay.
The little horns were opposed to daily sacrifice.
Are you reading verse 12?
Daniel 8:12
Yeah.
says, because of transgression, an army was given over to the horns to oppose the daily sacrifices, and he cast food to the ground, and he did all this and prospered.
What version are you reading?
New King James.
Okay. Who's got it in a more strict word-for-word translation? Christy's got it. Hang on, Christy's got her hand up here.
I was a Revised Standard version.
You've got the Revised Standard. Okay, let's hear the Revised Standard, please.
Because of wickedness, the host was given over to it together with the regular burnt offerings. It cast truth to the ground and kept prospering in what it did.
Now, the voice in the wilderness that said the NASB is very similar to that has failed to detect something very significant in the early part of the verse. Have you got NASB back here?
No, I have NIV, but I think it goes back to verse 10.
Oh, yes, it does go back to verse 10, but maybe we ought to begin with verse 10 and work our way through to 12, huh?
Yeah.
Pam has arisen. Thank you, Lord. Okay.
You want American Standard?
Pam, that would give me such feelings of well-being. My endorphins would rise dramatically.
And on account of transgression, the host will be given over to the horn along with the regular sacrifice, and it will fling truth to the ground and perform its will and prosper.
Oh, I thought you were going to read 10 through 12.
Oh, okay. Starting verse 10 then. And it grew up to the host of heaven and caused some of the hosts and some of the stars to fall to the earth, and it trampled them down. It even magnified itself to be equal with the commander of the host, and it removed the regular sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary was thrown down. And then connect with 12. And on account of transgression, the host will be given over to the horn, along with the regular sacrifice, and it will fling truth to the ground, and perform its will and prosper.
You getting a picture here? Then I heard one holy one say to another holy one, how long is this going to go on for? And the answer? Yeah? I'm not worrying about that. I'm wanting to know the answer to that. 2,300 evenings and mornings. We're coming back to the detail. I'm just wanting you to get the big picture. There is tearing down going on. And whom is it affecting? Come on, the same group that it always affects, because we are engaged in a life and death struggle. There's a great controversy raging, so the group that's being impacted could be termed the saints. Any other word? The people of God, yes. And their opposition is doing some pretty profound things. Let's list them, beginning with verse 10, and let's see what's being trampled. So it causes some of the host of heaven. It causes some of the host of heaven, where am I? And stars to fall to the earth. Wow. First thing we notice, and this is that little horn is doing this. This has to be interpreted yet, but this is the first thing we notice it's doing. It's causing some of the host of heaven and some of the host and some of the stars to fall to the earth. And it tramples them down. They are being trampled. Does that sound like anything to you? Beverly, was that a moment of elucidation there? My hopes were building, huh? Does it have a certain ring about it too? They're being trampled.
During the Dark Ages, when the Bible was taken away from everybody and the persecution was going on, they were persecuting and basically taking away all the truth of the knowledge of God. That's when the Reformers came in and said the just shall live by faith.
It's certainly worthy of investigation, isn't it? They were being trampled absolutely during that time.
And the whole truth of the Bible.
Well, hang on, let's let it come out point by point, huh? Verse 11, it magnifies itself, seeking to become equal to, come on, let the words come up, the commander, or what other word is used? The prince of the host. Wow. Is this a pretty arrogant development or what? It's seeking to be equal to the prince of the host. Now something very significant, probably the most significant statement. Takes away. By the way, you know what we need time for now, don't you? I mean, I would have to have time with you now. That's why we're hoping by the grace of God, if you all are faithful to your calling, we'll have Hebrews 2. Then we'll be able to pick up from here in words like host, daily sacrifice. I mean, I was studying this the other night, and the meaning of the term daily sacrifice was drawn out of the Old Testament, and I thought, wow, how confused we are over these issues if we don't let them arise biblically. Takes away the daily sacrifice. And not only that, but yes, the sanctuary, or the place of the sanctuary. The place of the sanctuary is cast down or thrown down. Wow. Wow. Verse 12. Because of, we might as well spell it out again, because of sin or transgression, what's given over to him? The host and just the host and the daily sacrifice. And the daily sacrifice are given to him. Wow. Incredible. That should be telling you something, because of sin. Sin where? In the camp. People of God, absolutely. Because of sin. I'll move this here so it's out of the way. Because of sin. And now, of course, the rest of verse 12, which is very significant. What else is thrown to the ground? You're supposed to have the gift of interpretation if you're in this class. Can't you read hieroglyphics after all these years? Because of sin / host and DS given to him. DS, of course, hopefully registering with you as daily sacrifice. Yep, just daily. And that's the term that's of great interest. Daily. Where am I? Or something else. Truth. Wow. Truth is flung to the ground. Wow. Joanne? If we get one more, we'll have 7? We must have 7. What was that point? Performs its will. Okay, that's in verse... well, it's kind of summarizing there, but for the sake of chiastic excellence, it prospers and continues to trample. There are many more points, by the way. Nick, was that a movement there?
Maybe the 7th one is actually in verse 12. It runs two things together. It says the host of the saints were given over to it, and the daily sacrifice was given over to it. Flip those, and
Yeah.
the host is what they sacrifice to another.
Yes, okay. The host, and this is what I've got here in this... Oh, I see what you're saying. So we could split that. I think it's an excellent suggestion, Nick. It probably makes a lot more sense than the generic thought of prospering, you know. Because obviously he's prospering if he's doing all this, you know. Very good, yep. That makes 7. Even Pat is satisfied, Nick. You probably have received an extra star on this occasion. It's been recorded, yes, sir. Okay, yes. So do we get the fact that it grew? I'm going to put it here. It grew. It grew. Yeah. Allow yourselves to contemplate. And we haven't opened up Daniel 7 or Daniel 9 or even anything in Revelation yet, because we don't really need to at this point. Or Daniel 12, yes, of course. We don't need to at this point because we've got enough on our plate at the moment to process the question that I laid on you. What biblical developments would you expect to take place when Jesus shifts the emphasis in his ministry, begins his final atonement? On earth, we could say, enters into the most holy place. But we know in heaven, and I made a note here in my Bible, there is that note in Hebrews 9, when it says that Jesus entered into the holy, it's the Greek word ta hagia. Ta hagia. And whenever it's used, even though it's confusing in Hebrews to see is he speaking of the holiest or the holy, because we think of the sanctuary in terms of the holy and the most holy. But Paul has chosen to use a word in Hebrews 9, which in Greek suggests the whole sanctuary. So when he says the holiest, he's referring to the whole sanctuary. And this morning, I believe we caught a glimpse of why he's doing it.
One place he says holy of holies.
Yeah.
It's very explicit, and that's the third verse.
Is it ta hagia again?
It's Hagion, Hagia.
Oh, yes.
Hagia, Hagion, the holiest of holies.
Holiest.
The only place he's talking about the
And the reason he's doing this in such a broad sense, surely you picked up this morning, didn't you? Because? Was that a voice back here?
The whole thing became the throne room.
Because he entered into the throne room of God. Yes. Thank you very much. That saves us much anguish, you know. If you're going to spend your life trying to squeeze heaven into the earthly model, I wish you luck. But if you'll allow yourselves to see that he entered into the throne room of God, there is movement up there which I think we see profoundly. We noticed this morning that the table of showbread was associated with being a throne. Is there any other object in the sanctuary in Revelation that's associated with being a throne? Just the table of showbread? Is there more than one throne? Huh? Anyone got a reference for me? We left that unconcluded this morning. In Revelation, chapter 8. Those of you that have strength should turn to this, Revelation 8 and verse 3. Revelation 8:3. Another angel came and stood at the altar holding a golden censer, and much incense was given to him that he might add to the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. All these little references to before the throne. What's the golden altar? What's that a reference to? Appears to be the altar of incense, and it just happens to stand immediately in front of the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat. Perhaps you're getting radical. It shows what? That the curtain is down at this point. Certainly is. And so we now get a glimpse in the book of Revelation that there's more than one throne in heaven. And as Pat pointed out this morning, the first one was in the north, and this one happens to be in the west. Is it possible, when Daniel said thrones were set up, he saw in vision God moving from the table of showbread to the Ark of the Covenant? I believe it is so. Was there a hand back here? Who was it? You know, it's a great insight you're giving. And when we were taught to pray, how were we taught to pray? Our Father. We went straight to the Father in the name of Jesus. That's the way it was intended to be. I appreciate that very much. I think it's an excellent point. Excellent point. Big question, because we're about to conclude, unfortunately. Ruth, I never thought I would hear you say that. You've been sitting next to Georgine too long. I'm not ready for questions yet, or comments. Listen carefully. Please let it soak in that the 2300-day prophecy is a prophecy dealing with the trampling down of the things of God, the people of God, their place of worship, their style of worship, the very elements of their worship, the very truth that they held and believed. In Revelation it goes further and says even the people themselves had war made with them. War against the saints, which you were alluding to in the Dark Ages. There's much more we can add to this from Revelation, but I'm just wanting you to see it from Daniel. This is a prophecy predicting how long. And look at what comes now with how long. I'm looking at verse 13 now. How long what? 4 things here. Let them emerge with splendiferous clarity. 4 things here, Daniel 8:13. I'm changing my whole vocabulary because of a very demeaning ode that was written about me. We should share it with the group here just for fun, Eric. But just hang on a moment. We're still in much more serious matters. I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that particular one who was speaking, how verbose that is, okay? How long will be the vision? The vision about? Of the daily, does it say sacrifice? Daily sacrifice, in parenthesis. While the transgression causes horror. Does anyone have another translation of that? All right, so while the transgression of desolation takes place, so as to allow both the sanctuary, or the holy place, we'll put in parenthesis here, and the host
Has to be listed number 4.
to be trampled. You're getting too methodical at this last remnants of time, Pat. Listen to what we've got here. This is very important now. I'm expecting you all to go out, by the way, and teach the prophecy of the 2300 days to somebody. It's the only way to cement it in place. And so we've got all these things happening. One angel turns to another angel and says, how long is this going to go on? So that the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation and the sanctuary and the host, they're all being trampled. Who wants to paraphrase that for me? Well, I hardly ever give such a unique opportunity, you know. What latitude, what liberality. Now you're going to have to make a complete statement if you're going to summarize all that. Yeah, but it's more than just persecution. Look at all that's happening. I'm wondering if anyone wants to make a summary. Wonderful challenge for a young mind, isn't it? A summary. Too big, huh? Maybe we should go much younger. Anyone wanting? Anyone paraphrasing that? David? Now when you paraphrase, you don't have to read it to me. I said paraphrase. In your own words.
How long will it be that the sacrifice of Christ will be made of none effect? His atoning sacrifice for us. Transgression of desolation, that which makes us desolate of.
Don't assume anything on that, of course. It's spelled out biblically. We can work that through.
Of getting both the sanctuary, that's the heavenly sanctuary, and the host, the people that are ministering in the heavenly sanctuary. It's essentially invalidating their work, making it of none effect on earth. And,
Cast down.
And allowed it trampled underfoot. That's a paraphrase.
Okay, yes, it is a very liberal paraphrase indeed. But
when Christ went to the temple, when he first went into the temple, he said, my house is made a den of thieves. When he wept over Jerusalem, he said, your house is left desolate. They had rejected sacrifice by
Okay? And you can trace the expression transgression of desolation through. It'll come out clear. That's a part of it for sure. Remind yourselves, of course, of the circumstances that Daniel was in when this was given. Where were the people of God? In Babylon. No kingdom. Jerusalem was destroyed. The temple was torn down. That was their current situation. There's only one question left to answer. Of course, it's very simple now. However, before we do that, we're about to conclude. You should now be saying to yourselves, well, at least I know what to look for at the ending of the 2300-day prophecy. And when did it end? What would you expect to see taking place beginning in 1844? Well, I saw a movement here. My hopes are rising, but dashed again. What would you expect to see being restored beginning 1844? I saw your lips moving, nothing clear emerging yet. That was several hundred years before 1844, though. What would you expect to see being restored in 1844? You've been on a roll today. Oh, amen. What a great statement to come out. Repeat it again in your better Bakersfield tones, you know. Listen very carefully to this. Listen. They haven't got it yet. You'll have to do better than that. They're not hearing you. Do you want to stand and broad? Do you want to come out here and use the mic? Huh? Come. This is such an important statement.
Understanding of the significance of the sanctuary and Jesus' place in
Wow. Boy, the response continues to grow here. We may even have a resurrection if you just kept saying it. Remarkable statement. An understanding of the sanctuary, of course, and Jesus' place in it. And what led you to add that little bit on the end, Jesus' place in it?
Well, that's a big significant part of the sanctuary.
And what words or triggered that hopefully in your mind from Daniel 8? What was being trampled upon?
The sacrifices and
Thank you. The daily sacrifice has been trampled. So not just the sanctuary, but the very services that were connected with it, which were focused on Jesus. Yes. A beautiful statement. Wow. Just allow yourselves to hear that. You have every expectation in the 19th century to see a movement come about where God restores the understanding of the sanctuary and Jesus' role in it. Amen. Isn't that exciting? And that's mind-blowing. Look at all the movements that arose in the 19th century. Mormonism, Christian Science, Jehovah's Witnesses, Spiritism. Why do you think there was such a proliferation? And by the way, most of them within 20 miles of William Miller. I was flabbergasted when I found out where the houses, you know, where Mary Baker Eddy lived and the Fox sisters lived. And I'm saying to myself, they're all in the vicinity.
Bill?
They are in the absolute vicinity of where God was bringing back truth. I mean, the near vicinity. You think an accidental development?
When I studied with Jehovah's Witnesses before I became an Adventist, they told me that group of people studied together.
Well, you know, Jehovah's Witnesses are an offshoot of an offshoot of an offshoot of an offshoot of Adventism, you know. They were all studying together in the beginning.
That's what they told me.
Remember, after the great disappointment, there was a great dispersion. A few clung together and continued to pray and study. So one of the most powerful things we would expect to see restored, the sanctuary and the role of Jesus in it. I'm still on this track, by the way.